Hello and welcome back to Jo's Art History Bite Size, small, manageable podcast episodes which sees me, Jo McLaughlin, your host and resident art historian, deep dive into a specific artwork or artist in 10 minutes or less. This week we're taking a deep dive into Prop, a sensational work by British artist Jenny Saville. Let's get started. Born in 1970, Jenny Saville studied at Glasgow School of Art from 1988 to 1992, and she's better known as a member of the Young British Artists, also known in the abbreviation terms of YBAs. This group includes the likes of Damien Hirst, Tracy Emin. You know this group, I've mentioned them a couple of times on here before. Throughout her artistic career, Saville explores the fragility, rejuvenation and decay of flesh, and her works are characterised by these large-scale canvases where the artist applies very thick layers of oil paint that are applied in very expressive motions and strokes. There's scrapes through them, smears, and artistically, the term is known as impasto. So impasto is when you apply paint incredibly thickly, and this is a key signifier of Jenny Saville's works. She works largely portraying portraits and nudes, and they're almost grotesque in nature. There's something that very much she sort of flips on their head about portraiture. And it was this that really helped her burst onto the art scene in the early 1990s. Now, one of her most influential and remarkable paintings by the artist was a painting that she painted very early on in her artistic career, and that is called Propped. And it's something that over the last 30 years has really helped propel Saville to international acclaim. Now, as mentioned, she went to Glasgow School of Art, and when she graduated in 1992, Propped was actually used as the cover of the Times Saturday Review. And lo and behold, Charles Saatchi, who's an infamous art collector and essentially bankrolled and funded the YBAs and really helped put British art on the map. It was seeing this work in the Times Saturday Review that led Charles Saatchi to buy not only Propped, but several of Jenny Saville's works. Now, throughout her work, Saville herself is interested in rewriting the traditions of the female nude, and as I've said previously, subverts and distorts what is essentially portraiture, but very much attacks the male viewer and the male and society's understanding and want of how a female should look. And in Propped, that's exactly that. It's a large-scale self-portrait of Saville, and the artist sits nude, staring down at the viewer. She is elevated, as I said, looking down, and she sits propped on this stool. She looks incredibly uncomfortable, and she grabs her very curvaceous thighs, and she almost looks to be in pain when you look at this painting, and it's something that's incredibly mesmerizing to view. And it's an artwork that I only came across a couple of years ago during a research session, and I've never really seen a portrait like that. And I would thoroughly encourage you, if you don't know what Propped is, have a look on my Instagram. Even better, give it a Google. And there's lots written on this piece. It's a very, very important piece of modern and contemporary British art history. And the painting itself, her flesh, it's not this perfected, rosy cheeked, beautiful ivory skin. It's subtle blues and yellows and pinks. And the idea is to highlight the imperfections across her skin and her face, which again is very much sort of screwed up as she grips onto her thighs, again almost writhing in pain. The primary subject of all of Saville's early works is the artist herself. This was part due to the convenience of having a model to hand, and essentially the artist is always with their painting, so she decided that she would be the sitter for the majority of her first body of work, shall we say, no pun intended. This also very much can be taken as a bit of a radical political statement, in that the female artist is carving out time for herself to be the subject and be centre stage. Something very famously within art history, female painters are overlooked. And by doing a portrait of this scale, And in this subversive nature, she really was making a statement. Now, when Propt was first displayed at her degree show in 1992, the artist hung a mirror standing opposite the painting, and it was at equal distance and equal height to the work. And although it later ceased to be displayed in this fashion, there was reasons behind the mirror. But we'll get into that in just a minute. Now, there's many points of interest and intrigue throughout this work. As I've said, her undulating skin, her grimacing face, how she's positioned herself very uncomfortably propped on this stool within her artist studio. But one of the most interesting things about the painting is that there is text scribbled across the canvas and covering the artist's body. Now, this is only one of two paintings from this period where Saville has directly incorporated text into her work. And again, it's a statement on subjecting the female as subject, as the prize to look at. And what Propt actually is Saville looking at her own reflection. And she's very much sort of picking herself apart as she sits on this stool. And the text, which is scribbled across the painting, is a quote from When Our Lips Speak Together. And it's an essay by French feminist Lucy Iligaray, which is about essentially how men and women interact. But what's very interesting, and I don't think I've mentioned about the quote, is that the quote is inverted and it's illegible to read unless you are looking in a mirror. And this is where the idea that you are actually the mirror, that you are in place of the mirror and are looking at the artist and the artist is picking her apart. I find this a very interesting take on portraiture. And what she's trying to do here is essentially ask the viewer to really, really look at her and pick her apart, even though she's depicted herself in this quite uncomplimentary and, as you will, unidealized way. She is a woman with all her flaws and imperfections on show, as all people have, but yet she's chosen to be very honest about how she looks, how she feels internally. And what Saville was also trying to do here is essentially she grew up in the 90s, the 80s and 90s, where what Saville is trying to do here is also start a conversation about how females were depicted in the media. Growing up in the 80s, Saville has stated that it's given endless amount of women that she knows eating disorders and body dysmorphia. Of course, that body dysmorphia is something that's very recently been coined as a term, but as a woman myself who grew up in the 90s, I can completely know what she's talking about and coming from. All these pencil thin models, and there was a culture of magazines that used to love pitting women against each other and picking apart their flaws. I remember growing up in the 90s, there was a popular cultural magazine here in the UK where one of the top, I'm going to say red sections here in air quotes, was a section where it was famous women on holiday, and someone would red circle around their cellulite or their fat or when they've had a double chin. And that was a 2-page spread every week in the magazine, was to show you how essentially imperfect these supposedly perfect people were, but not in an empowering way. And this was something that Saville was sick of seeing and something that inspired her to paint Propt in the way that she's done. Now, as I've mentioned, she has a quote which is about how men and women interact with each other. The quote is subverted. And in order to read the quote, as you may remember, I said that there was a mirror that used to be hung opposite it. So actually what she's asking you to do to fully understand the work is to turn your back on her. And essentially, it kind of makes you as the viewer part of the problem, in that you aren't embracing this new model of contemporary art history, of the real woman. You yourself are part of the problem, that you are turning away in order to fully understand what's going on, even though you're just trying to read a quote. And I think it's very, very clever, and it's a really fun way to play with an audience and how they interact with an artwork. And I think this is one of the reasons why Saville and her work catapulted into international acclaim. And she's somebody now that has retrospectives all over the world and is highly respected within the field of painting. Now, as I said, the quote that is included is by French feminist Lucy Iligaray, and In this essay, Igari points to the fact that men use women as mirrors in order to satisfy male narcissism. In such, Igari believes that women find themselves exhausting their strength on becoming something that is barely alive, and in quotations here, glacial and mute. And the quote chosen by Saville is, "If we continue to speak in this sameness, speak as men have spoken for centuries, we will fail each other. Again, words will pass through our bodies, above our heads, disappear, make us disappear." And this is very much a rally cry to women, both from Igares and from Saville, and including this in her painting. And it's very much asking for women to step up into their power and essentially take stock of how we've been treated historically, and essentially just call for no more nonsense and for equality. And there's also something to say about the work in that Saville is displaying women as a powerful subject, that women themselves have this power. The message that is included on the work is a message of empowerment, and it's not something that you necessarily see when you first look at this work. It's only once you deep dive into it, because as I've said, it's not the easiest work to look at. If you think of classical paintings where it's these English roses and very sort of beautiful, attractive, ideal views of what a woman and a woman's body should look like, by rebelling against this need, Saville is really, as I've said, a battle cry. This work is a battle cry for women to embrace their power exactly as they are. And I find it something that's really quite radical about this painting. And of course, this is what's helped Saville and this work stand the test of time. You have been listening to Jo's Art History Podcast Bite Size, small, manageable episodes which sees me, Jo McLaughlin, your resident host and art historian, deep dive into a specific artwork or artist in 10 minutes or less. If you have enjoyed this episode, please make sure to like, rate and subscribe, as it helps other listeners find us. If you want to support the podcast, why not leave us a review or tell someone you know who may enjoy listening all about it. If you would like to support the future of the podcast, please consider purchasing and gifting me a book from my Amazon wishlist included in the show notes below. If you would like to get in touch, please feel free to do so. It'd be lovely to hear from you. You can email me, joesarthistory@gmail.com, or you can find me via Instagram, which is @joesarthistory, or you can search for my name, Jo McLaughlin, and you'll find me that way too. Finally, I've been your host and your resident art historian, Jo McLaughlin, and thank you so much for listening. Keep learning, and remember, art is for all, even in bite-sized editions. See you next time. Bye.